Rooster here, new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of REO Speedwagon. I've had a lot of requests to feature some of REO Speedwagon's music and also music from the late great guitarist Gary Richrath. And REO Speedwagon formed in Champaign, Illinois in 1967 and literally dominated the 70s with this hard rock, kind of infectious, blues rock, style and sound. And then as the 70s moved into the 80s, they kind of lost some of that hard-hitting kind of, bluesy rock. And they replaced it more with ballads and keyboards and, slow songs and mushy songs and stuff like that. So I definitely prefer 70s REO Speedwagon when they were rocking. And in the 80s, they got a little softer, and I didn't really like the 80s output from the band. So this lesson's going to focus on that hard-rockin', 70s REO Speedwagon. And without question, the late great guitarist Gary Richrath was the driving force of REO Speedwagon's early music and output, and you could definitely tell. I mean, it was centered around the guitar. A lot of their songs, just had this really powerful guitar attack, solos and fills and riffs and all kinds of stuff hitting all over the place. And then somewhere around 1970, moving into 1980, after the Nine Lives album, they noticeably changed. Of course, they became massively successful after that. And I Can't Fight This Feeling and all those songs. But I don't really like that era as much. It's a little bit too polished and too commercial and poppy. I love that raw, hard-hitting, blues rock output from Gary, in the early days. And Gary did leave the band, actually, in 1989. He did pass away in 2015. But he did leave the group in 1989 and really never looked back. I think he, started his own band, Richrath, and I think he did kind of rejoin, like, a few live performances with the group. But he never returned to REO Speedwagon. So this lesson's definitely going to be a big tribute to Gary Richrath and his music, in the 70s with REO Speedwagon. And as I just mentioned, all the music in this episode is going to come from 70s REO Speedwagon. So it's everything before High Infidelity, which some people, that's the first album they may have noticed, from REO Speedwagon, because it was a big hit. And that was in 1980, I believe. But everything I'm going to show in this lesson is before that, so the early years of REO Speedwagon. With the opening, that's the timeless, the Unidentified Flying Tuna Trot, and that's from the album You Can Tune a Piano, But You Can't Tune a Fish, which is on the wall right there. I love that album cover and that album title, too. It's just so 70s. It's like, okay, you're naming this album what? And you're going to put what on the cover? That only could happen in the 70s. But anyway, the Unidentified Flying Tuna Trot starts like this. So it's definitely missing the drums, the bass, and the piano are all hitting really hard in there too. But that opening, you're literally just doing this full-on bolero on an E major like that. Then D5 to an A5. And then do the bolero on the A and the D again. And then loop that again. E. Second time, just end on that B power chord, and then you definitely hear the single note riff chime in here. So it's like quick hammer on to E and then that C sharp on the A, grabbing that low G, and you're kind of dipping into the E blues scale because we're grabbing this B flat right there, the flat 5. And that riff's kind of elusive. It's busy, but it's all right there in the same neighborhood. And you do it again. And it's kind of weird, because you're rolling into that E note. And then the second time you're just rolling into a D. Like that. basically loop that bolero riff again and just keep jamming. When that piano lick comes in, it's so cool. Okay, up next is the Flying Turkey Trot, and this is from the REO album, and this is actually before the Unidentified Flying Tuna Trot, so I'm not really sure what's going on with the Flying Trots and REO Speedwagon, but the Flying Turkey Trot's funky like this. So it starts with this big slide, from that G note there on the 15th fret down to a G on the open position right down there on the 3rd fret. And it's basically, that single note riff's kind of based around G7. So you got the big slide, and then there's a lot of handling noise, these percussive, muted strums and real funky, interaction between those single notes like this. Loosely based around kind of like a hybrid blues, I guess. And I love that, chromatic walk up right there. That's really cool. So one more time, they're really slow. Right there, the second time you're going to go to a G sharp and then do the same riff in A right here. Second time right there, go to a B power chord, and then you've got this E power chord to D to a B minor, and then A power chord, walk down this G sharp, G to F sharp, to that low E open, and then it's a G slid A to B, and then that A, like this. The second time there is just that A power chord, and you're walking down that G sharp, G to F sharp 3 times in a row. And right there it goes back to that G riff. The next example is from the song Lay Me Down. This is from the very first REO Speedwagon album, and there's actually 2 guitars. One guitar is just banging out bar chords, and the other guitar, which I assume is Gary, is playing a solo. So the first guitar is really easy. It's just C major, and then G major, and then A minor, and then F to G, and you do it again. C major, and then G, A minor, and then F, G. And then I'm going to loop this with the TC Electronic Ditto looper and add Gary's licks. So it's like this. Jimmy Page a little bit too, but I love those licks. And I love this chromatic. You're kind of walking into that D right there, and then timeless licks there from Gary Richrath for sure. Now let's get funky. This is Whisky Night from the Riding the Storm Out album, and he's actually using a wah for this, which I didn't break out a wah to demonstrate it here, but it's real funky like this. Actually a little G7 right here, and that G7's moving to a G6 right there. Just move that F back to E, and then you hear it move into this partial C, so it's like a C over G right there. And you definitely hear that C move back to that partial B flat. So it's, you know, a very simple progression: G7 to G6, a partial C, and then C to B flat. But it's the groove and everything. Of course, the wah kind of adds some excitement and color too. But a cool riff, really basic, but so cool. Next up is the song It's Everywhere, which is also from the Riding the Storm Out album, and once again there's two guitars, and there's one guitar doing this. It's really basic, just an A power chord, this little bending lick, so you're kind of moving back and grabbing that E note. Reminds me of Jimmy Page once again. Then do that A riff again. And the second time you're going to end on that G note right there. There's a harmony part, so I'm going to loop that with the TC Electronic Data Looper, and you're doing this. It's a really basic harmony part. You're just kind of bending and kind of answering, you know, that other riff down here. Really crafty, you know, harmony parts from REO Speedwagon right there. Last but not least is Back on the Road Again. This is from the 9 Lives album, and I always forget that this is actually REO Speedwagon. You know, a different vocalist, and it kind of hits a little differently, but like this. Something like that. So we're literally kind of playing with this, it's kind of like a partial G minor, kind of G minor 7 too, because we're grabbing that F. So it's kind of a busy little, you're kind of grabbing that F and G, and you're also grabbing that C and D back there, and kind of moving over to that F. So it's very quick, you know, kind of moves around a lot. And the second time you want to end with that bend, you know, F to G, and then do that first riff again. And the last time you want to end on that D power chord. Grab that D power chord and walk down D, C, B flat, A, and then move to a G power chord right there. You know, great great song, and definitely when I hear that on the radio, I always turn it up and end up driving a little bit faster, because that's a cool song. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of REO Speedwagon, and it made me really happy when I noticed the request coming in for REO Speedwagon and also Gary Richrath, and I thought, yeah, we're definitely going to go there, because 70s REO Speedwagon is awesome. It's very, energetic. There's lots of power and energy in their music, and Gary's, guitar playing is a big reason for that. And no offense to their 80s and 90s, output, all the power ballads and keyboard, love songs and stuff. That's just not really my thing. I'm a rocker at heart. I love the energy and the volume and the power of well-played, rock music, hard rock and metal. Also a big funk and blues fan and acoustic music and stuff. But those love songs and ballads, I usually just steer right around that stuff or skip it. If I'm listening to a CD or something, it's like, yeah, next song, because it has a place, and if those are your favorite songs, that's fine. It's just not for me. It's almost like food or something. It's like, yeah, there's certain things I really want, and there's certain things I avoid as far as cuisine or a meal. And music's the same way. There's certain things I just lap it up like a dog, and then other stuff I just run screaming where it's like, no, I don't want that. So with REO Speedwagon, it's almost like Chicago and some of those other bands. The early years were really gritty and rockin'. And then as time went on and they, had some success with ballads and love songs and stuff, they kind of changed their direction. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also nothing like those early years when it's gritty and raw, and they're not worried about love songs and the charts. They're just writing music and playing. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Like Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.